Welcome to Soul Therapy. I'm Katie.
And I'm Kate, and this is a space where we take a deep breath, dive into healing, and laugh a little along the way.
Think of this as your cozy corner for exploring how to feel better, grow stronger, and live with more ease.
We'll chat about everything from practical tools to soulful insights, all designed to help you connect with yourself and navigate life's ups and downs.
We've put together this Soul Therapy session series to help you to come back into alignment.
By alignment, we mean living with expression of your true self and values, feeling centered and grounded in yourself, and with an inner peace, trusting in the flow of life and your role within it.
So listen along and join in with the exercises, and let us know how you get on. Ready?
Let's do this.
Hi, welcome to Soul Therapy. My name's Katie.
And I'm Kate, and today we're talking about children and young people.
So I think sometimes, although obviously we were all a child once, right? We were all a young person once. But I think sometimes we can feel a bit disconnected from where children and young people are at in their current day-to-day life. Things change, right? They're growing up in a slightly different world than the one we grew up in. And that's the way it's supposed to be. But it can feel a bit like one generation is struggling to connect with the other.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, when you think about the world of social media now and cell phones, like I remember I didn't have my first cell phone until I was like 14, and now you see like 8-year-olds walking around with cell phones. Like
Exactly.
I even feel disconnected, right?
Yeah,
and I'm not even that far away from that age group.
I had the same. Like I think I was 18 when I had my first cell phone. So it's a completely different world. And I think we're the last generation really that comes from that world that crosses that boundary, which is interesting. But it does mean, of course, that that difficulty between the different generations to actually connect and understand and communicate with each other.
Yeah, it's very true. We're kind of like the sandwich generation, I guess, so to speak. Like we're literally in between two very distinct different worlds. Like I was reading that we're actually the last generation who's going to know what it's like not to have cell phones as teenagers and be so immersed in that world of social media. Like I remember I was like, I think 16 when Facebook came out. So I was kind of at the tail end of like my teenage years, and it was still a very new concept then. Like it was like no way like it is now with like TikTok and like Instagram, and it's very much kind of like a part of every day-to-day life, whereas there it was kind of just getting introduced into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this disconnect between the different generations can kind of come through as a frustration, particularly when we maybe have things like you have to respect your elders, and then maybe there's disagreements between what the different generations think.
Like those difference kind of in beliefs and values. I mean, yeah, when you think about the older generation and some of the instilled beliefs that they have versus the younger generation, then it does kind of come through as a disconnect. And yeah, this idea of respecting our elders. And like, I remember like I used to hear that all the time, even growing up. And it's like, no one ever kind of sat down and explained, what does that mean? What does that look like? Like this idea of like respecting your elders.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think realistically, what I see now is that everyone we could all just walk around with mutual respect for each other, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because we're all meeting independent individuals.
Yes.
But we're seeing our connection and seeing ourselves mirrored and brought through them all. And so we're seeing the beauty in them all. So just meeting everybody with that level of respect and connection,
right,
and hopefully being met with that level of respect and connection, so that it becomes really mutual. And in that way, the wisdom of the elder generations can be passed on, and the younger generations will be really receptive to it. But at the same time, the elder generation can benefit from the new perspectives and ideas,
right,
and just the refreshing viewpoint sometimes of the younger generation.
Yeah, and that acknowledgement that it goes both ways, right? And kind of these another saying that came to mind is like do as I say, not as I do. And that comes a lot from the older generation when they're speaking to maybe their children, their youth, nieces and nephews.
Yes.
And that idea of like, I'm not going to do it, but you should, right? And kind of the
Right.
pressure that puts on kids and how confusing that can be. And again, that idea of almost a superiority that, you know, I'm older, I have more life experience, so you should listen to me. But a lot of the time, that doesn't leave room for people to be autonomous beings and to walk a life path that maybe involves certain lessons that they need to learn, that, you know, we don't want to impose too much on that.
And of course, it can be fully hypocritical as well. That idea of don't do as I do as I tell you, becomes very obvious that you're not going to follow your own rules. And there's a couple of questions around that, like how do people feel it's okay to dictate to others when they're not following them themselves?
Right.
But at the same time, why aren't they following them themselves? Because I've definitely had points in my past where I would kind of tell people the safer way, tell people the more correct way to do something. But then I would do something different, in the fact that I would be happy to risk my own safety, but not theirs. So it's not always, that hypocritical statement is not always coming from a condescending nature. It's not always one where you want to control other people. Sometimes it's one where you're kind of neglecting yourself. So I just want to like hold a bit of space for people who are coming from that other perspective too, and just know that we're not judging anybody. I think, a lot of us have probably said that in some way or form, told someone to do something that we weren't really doing ourselves.
Right.
Yeah, and it's only by owning it and getting radically real with it that we can accept it and move on.
Right. Yeah. And it comes down again to that idea of self-awareness, right? And like sometimes we blindly do that without even realizing, like, oh, I'm giving advice that I don't even practice myself, right? And it's this concept of like being the change that you wish to see in the world. Like sometimes simply like you don't need to give advice, just live how you think, you know, you want to live, and people will be influenced by that authenticity that you give off without needing to kind of tell people how they should live.
Absolutely. Right. And this really comes into spending time with children and young people as well, because I think a lot of the time older adults actually feel that any adults really feel that they want to direct children and young people in how to live. And so, you know, young people, I'm talking all the way up to, this is why I got confused with the word adults, because I'm talking all the way up to kind of 25 or so, because we're still learning and growing in life. We're still learning how to create our world and how we have that power to do so. But yeah, I think that sometimes actually really recognizing children and young people as independent individuals with something valid that they can bring. And they're not just empty vessels to fill with what we think needs to be there. They actually already have their whole self to bring through. And it's about kind of cultivating that opening so that they can bring themselves in as best a way as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes it's, you know, not trying to live unlived dreams through a child or through a young person, right? Not projecting those wishes that I wish I did it, so I'm going to get my child to do it onto them, right? It's respecting that they're autonomous beings who can bring, them true selves, and maybe they have other hopes and dreams that they need space to be able to live out.
Yeah, not trying to fix what we regret or maybe wish we'd done in our lives through them. I think that can feel very tempting sometimes. And I think that sometimes it can come from a very good place, as in someone thinking, well, I think I did this wrong, or I didn't enjoy the fact that I did this, or if I went back and did it again, I wouldn't do this. But the reality is you are a different person from anyone else and from the child you're talking to. And so it doesn't necessarily mean they feel the same way about anything. And also equally, it's important for people where it's safe. It's important for them to actually learn from their own experience, not always be dictated to.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, and that's how young people learn, is sometimes doing it themselves, right? And of course, we're not speaking in situations where there's imminent risk or danger, but it's allowing, you know, a child to explore their world and to learn from the world around them instead of always trying to prevent a negative outcome that maybe would actually be beneficial had they walked through and learned, so they won't actually do it again.
Exactly. I mean, and I think, school is a very strict institution in the way that you have a set path to follow. But a friend and I noticed something within a class there even. So we had to follow the structure, and it was, you do it this way or it's going to be wrong. It was a maths class. Right?
Yes.
So you would have thought there'd be a clear categorical wrong. If you don't do it the way they're telling you, you're going to get it wrong.
Yeah.
And we had approached the thing we'd been set in a different way, but we kept getting the answers right. So although the teacher was saying to us, you're not doing it how I'm telling you to, we were saying, well, I understand that, but we're still getting the right answer.
Right.
So they eventually went off and talked to a higher teacher in the school, and they worked out that we'd actually been just doing it a different way. It was perfectly valid.
Exactly.
So just recognizing that it's not always the older person that knows best.
Yes.
There may be something new to be found through listening to younger people. Maybe if it's not a brand new mathematical formula, it's the resurgence of something that you hadn't taught them, that they found for themselves.
Exactly, right? Like kids can definitely be a parent's or aunt, uncle's biggest teacher, right? Like they really can. They bring such a fresh perspective, and they can teach us just as much about ourselves as, we can teach children, right? So that recognition that it is that two-way street. Right?
Yeah, completely. And so when we open up, rather than projecting our own issues or projecting our own dreams onto them, or our own requirements that we feel will be the only thing that keeps them safe, maybe, not necessarily coming from a bad place, but yeah, well, instead of projecting all those things onto them, actually turning around and listening properly to them, hearing who they are, because that's where the joy also lies. That's the real beauty, is that you get to spend your time with this amazing little person who's just coming into being who they are. So who are they?
Right. Yeah. And children can be so fun to be around because it's like they're not as almost like tainted by societal expectations and, so to speak, robotic. Like they're not as obsessed with following that checklist that we spoke about in earlier sessions of like, I need to do this, this, and this. Like they haven't been through that pressurized world yet. So they're like the epitome of like being your authentic self, right? Like they really aren't so enmeshed in, what people, in pleasing other people, right? They just kind of do what they want to do. They say what they want to do, and like they're very unfiltered, right?
Yeah.
So they can really offer like fun and a fresh perspective.
Yeah, and allow us to unlock our own inner child through the interaction with them.
Yes.
And so it's really, instead of kind of fostering our way onto them, it's kind of a collaboration, a co-creation of whatever we're doing together, getting them involved and really respecting and listening to their opinion and just marveling at what they come out with and what you find, really.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and like I've heard the saying, it's like if you need kind of like a perspective on life, sit down and talk to a 4-year-old and an 84-year-old, right? So it's that recognition that, the older generations and the younger equally hold value. What a 4-year-old has to tell you as far as life advice is just as valuable as what an 84-year-old has to tell you, right? There's no, better or worse. They both have value.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I was about 4 or 5 and being pressed for an answer in school about what did I want to do with my life? What did I want to be when I grew up?
Yeah.
And my answer was happy. And I was told that wasn't an answer.
I think I said I wanted to be like a clown or something.
Yeah. I ended up drawing myself in a field surrounded by lots of animals. I think, because I thought that was showing happiness.
That's so sad that they told you that wasn't, you couldn't be that. Like,
well, it wasn't really that you couldn't be it, but it's just like they said, oh no, you have to work out how you're going to be it.
Oh, okay.
So they wanted me, if I liked animals, they wanted me to be a vet, or run a farm or this kind of thing. And then they wanted that to be what I was going to do. And then happiness would kind of come as a byproduct.
Right.
But this is one of the problems that we're kind of creating in life and fostering on children is the idea that happiness is a as a natural byproduct that you just don't need to think about or pay any attention to. And the
Mm.
idea that happiness is not really a choice that you can
Right.
make.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always found through life that the opposite is true. It's not about following the set path necessarily. It's about creating my own way. And also within that way, whatever it is, I need to choose happiness.
Right.
It can be found in the
Yeah.
strangest situations, but I need to
Mm-hmm.
choose it and look for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. Again, that reminder that happiness is a choice. It's not something that descends upon you every day, right? It's actively choosing to be happy and doing things that make you happy, right? It's like we kind of have this expectation that we just own the right to be happy. Like we should wake up and feel happy every day, right? And it is a choice.
It's something you
right?
cultivate.
Something that you cultivate.
Plant it and you grow it within yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And if you plant it and if you grow it and if you
Yeah.
water it, it will bloom. But
Yeah.
if you don't want to sow those seeds and then you just expect happiness to grow,
Right.
it doesn't work quite that way.
Mm-mm.
So you're an active participant in your own happiness.
Definitely, yeah. And it requires constant watering. Like you said, right? You just can't plant a seed and think it's just going to grow. That needs watering, it needs nurturing, right? You need to continue to water that to continue to cultivate happiness.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think though sometimes what can happen as well is that, being around children and young people, particularly if we're kind of looking after them, whether it's in a work sense or whether it's as a parent or a caregiver, I think it can turn into a bit of a battle zone. Rather than, all this fun we've been speaking of is fine and dandy. But I certainly remember these times when in the middle of supermarkets with, children screaming around me that I was responsible for.
Yeah.
And it didn't really feel like, I was finding the joy in that situation so much. Although retrospectively you can see I can.
Yeah.
Because I can now. But actually at the time it was very challenging. So I think a lot of people are really just looking to make that space between those challenges in order to be able to invoke some of this joy and happiness.
Yeah, and it's so easy to get in. And yeah, like you said, you see this in the supermarket, you see this, maybe on a plane, at the playground, this power struggle that happens so often between caregivers and children, right? Because it really is a power struggle. The child wants to do one thing and the parent doesn't want them to do it or wants them to do another thing, right? And again, it's looking at how to manage that. And I think, one thing that's important to remember is kids like have bad days too, and when I used to work with military families, I worked a lot with children and parents, and sometimes just that simple reminder of like, kids, they aren't always going to behave how you want them to. Just like we have good and bad days and we might, not be our best self every day. It's like children are like that too, right? So it's remembering like, don't put higher expectations on your child than you do yourself. Like leave room for allowing a child to have a bad day and just providing them the space and the love to be able to communicate that to you,
I think it's really challenging as well, because obviously with a child, they do need the care and they do need the attention, and they can't just be off on their own completely. So I think on those times where we might know that we need to take ourselves out for a walk alone for half an hour or 20 minutes just to kind of cool down in a situation, a child doesn't really have that option. Of course we can take them out for a walk, but it might have moved past that stage. It might be that they need some time without someone taking them anywhere, without someone requiring anything from them. And I think that can be just challenging because we want to look after them in that situation, but at the same time we need to create some space to give them so that they can actually feel what they're feeling.
Yeah, and remembering all these things like the going out for the walk and taking time alone, like these are all coping skills that we learn. And it's remembering children, if they haven't learned them, they don't know, right? So part of a caregiver's job is to teach those coping skills, to teach the child the connection between behavior and feelings, to teach them how to express their feelings in a way that is healthy and more appropriate, right? Like a lot of kids I know when they get mad, they tend to throw things, right? That's them saying that they're feeling really overwhelmed and frustrated, and they simply just can't find the words, right? So sometimes it's the job of the parent to educate them on, it seems like you're feeling really angry and frustrated right now. You know, when we feel this way, we don't throw things, we can do this instead. So a lot of the time it's working on teaching kids those coping skills, because you can't just expect them to know how to handle these big emotions if they aren't told how.
Absolutely. Right? And I think the fundamentals of that is to make sure our own coping skills are in place to start with. Because I've seen it quite a few times, I think probably everyone has in the street, when there's a child shouting and the parent will shout back, stop shouting, you know, telling them to stop shouting by shouting at them. And I think, you know, I've definitely felt the frustration of being in that situation where the child is shouting and you want them to stop. So I feel it from that perspective too. But the same with the throwing. A lot of the time you might see that, you know, a parent is throwing something themselves when they get angry, or, you know, what the child has thrown, the parent will pick that up and throw it
back, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think one of the things that children do is that they don't just bring us all this joy, they actually raise up on any underlying issues in us, and they bring them up to the surface and they challenge, they wave them right in our faces.
Literally,
and they challenge us. Absolutely. They challenge us to actually face those elements in ourselves and to grow through them. So yes, they are amazing, but they are, you know, one of life's biggest challenges, really, because they're going to take everything that you've questioned about yourself, or maybe haven't wanted to look at to question, and they're going to wave it in front of you,
and they'll amplify it, and they'll put it back on you, right? So it's like that idea that kids are literally like, you know, they're so influenced by what they see. Like, it doesn't matter what you tell a child, they're gonna mirror whatever they see in the world, right? So if they see mom or dad yell when they're angry, of course they're gonna yell too. Like, that's just natural. What, you know, that's what they've learned. If they see, you know, anger equals something getting thrown, if they see mom or dad throw something, well, of course, you know, that's what they're gonna do when they get angry. So it's remembering that parents truly are the role models, and you can't expect something of your child that you can't even expect of yourself. Like, if you can't even cope with your anger, it's so unfair to think your child's going to be able to cope, right? Like, you can't put more expectations on your child than you would on an adult to, you know, hopefully they will have the skills in place to be able to manage it and then teach their child.
Yeah, I think also it's about giving some space for compassion for yourself as well, because nobody's saying that because you have a child you have to suddenly be a perfect individual. None of us are, but we're all moving towards the best version of ourselves, the version of ourselves that's true to us and who we want to be. And so it's really about owning that fully. So for example, if the child is shouting and you shout back, just kind of maybe catching yourself with some compassion and thinking, oh, I don't know if that helped me in this situation. And then explaining to the child in a better situation, when things have cooled down a little bit, maybe explaining to the child, you know, when you shouted, I shouted back at you, and I realized I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry, but I didn't like it when you shouted at me. Did you like it when I shouted at you? And they'll say no, and you say no, and this kind of thing. And then you can agree not to do it again, maybe in the future.
And then it's this time, and we're going to do this instead. So instead of shouting, we're going to sit down and say how angry we are, right? We're going to use our words to verbalize that. So it's teaching them another way.
Absolutely. Just to teach them a way to face up to it. And in that, we actually teach ourselves a lot as well. I don't know if, you know, we realize that, or if parents realize that when you take on caregivers, but actually you're going to grow as much as the child. Just they're going to grow physically and emotionally and mentally, but you're definitely going to grow emotionally and mentally.
So it's really about, at the end of the day, just behaving the way you want your child to behave, right? So it's like, if you don't want your child to yell, then don't yell. If you don't want them to throw things, don't throw things, right? And sometimes that does involve, as adults, equally, if we didn't learn these coping skills as children, you know, we can't expect to know them as adults. So sometimes it is taking that responsibility and seeking support from a therapist, learning those coping skills so that you can model them for your child.
Exactly, so that you can model exactly what you want.
Exactly.
So that then the next time that they are maybe throwing things around in an aisle in Tesco's, you can actually turn around and say to them, you know, please stop doing that. Get down on their level and talk to them about it, and actually say, you know, we don't do this. How are you feeling? You know, what's going on for you? And if they can't respond to you, you can just give words to them to see if you can pick up on what they're feeling. Are they feeling they're throwing things at you in an aisle in the supermarket? Are they feeling frustrated with being there? Don't they want to be there? Are they feeling hungry? We've all done that, right? We've all walked around a supermarket thinking, I am actually really hungry now at this stage. And just recognizing, through doing that, you can actually start to recognize where the issue is coming from, usually, as well. What are they? And they don't really have these words to give to their feelings. They don't really have this capacity yet. So you're doing it for them, but you're checking in with them that that's correct. You're checking for a response. You know, are they feeling angry? Are they feeling sad? Are they feeling hungry? Remember to keep it simple enough for their age category to register it.
Right. And it's really about identifying those early signs of the child potentially is going to go into tantrum mode, because it's just like adults. When we get into this certain point, there's like no return, right? Because it's like the brain shuts off, and that happens with kids too, right? So sometimes, you know, when a kid gets to a point where they're that escalated, just like with an adult, there's no reasoning with them. And in that point, you kind of just have to let the tantrum go, because fortunately, just like adults, we can't stay in a state like that for so long, because it's literally exhausting, right? So in those situations, it's making sure that the child is safe and they're not going to hurt themselves. And then they have to work through it, because there's no reasoning with a child who gets to a certain point, just like there's no reasoning with an adult who gets to a certain point, right? So it's really looking at those early warning signs so you can intervene before, you know, your child gets to a point where they've gone full on tantrum.
Yeah, absolutely. And also recognizing your own kind of self-care. I think we all know quite a few adults who've hurt their backs trying to lift or stop children having tantrums. Just recognizing where you're at with that, and maybe just supporting them while they move through that big emotion.
Yes.
Recognizing that you're there for them. If you do get in early before they go full tantrum, you can always try things like distraction.
Yes.
That's a really good
Distraction is a big one.
Yeah,
I love distraction because it's like so easy, especially with like young kids. Like a 2-year-old might be walking and they trip and fall and they're like screaming their head off, and then you like pick them up and like, you know, put them up in the air, and then they're laughing.
Exactly.
Right? Like, distraction is like
find an interesting caterpillar.
Yeah, or then you like give them a stuffed animal, and then all of a sudden they're not crying anymore.
Yeah,
right? So
exactly.
distraction, like don't underestimate kind of that idea of distraction, and then also redirection. So, you know, when kids are kind of having a tantrum, they've lost emotional control, and sometimes they need that structure and that direct prompt of telling them what to do, right?
Absolutely.
Because they're kind of losing control. So sometimes someone who can come in and give them that structure can be really helpful and safe for them, and a direct command of put that down right now. Like if your child is holding something, you know they're getting escalated, it's a good chance to kind of throw it. So you can directly say to them, put that down on the ground, right? Or give it to me. It's always good to give kids an option, 2 options, to avoid the power struggle. Because if you say to a 3-year-old, give that to me, they're going to say no. If you say you can either give that to me or you can go and put it back on the shelf, then you're making them feel like they're in control. You're avoiding the power struggle. They'll most likely go and put it back on the shelf because they don't want to give it to you. But the point is, the outcome is the same. You've removed the object from the child's hand that's potentially going to get thrown either at you or someone else.
Yeah, you've moved on from that situation. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I think it is a case of just allowing them the time as well. And I know that this can really come to a head around bedtime.
Oh, yeah.
I know a lot of people struggle with the bedtime ritual routine, getting that in place so that children are happy to go to bed. And I think that no matter what we do, I think there's always going to be those nights when they don't want to go smoothly. because maybe something exciting is going on around and they don't want to stop playing a game right now or something. But I think we've had that feeling as well, right? Where we've looked at the clock and we've realized we have to be up for work the next day and we really should be going to bed, but we want to keep doing what we're doing. So this is the thing. Children aren't that different. They're small humans. They're not any different to us in that way. So we can recognize their feelings because we've felt them too. But I think, the bedtime ritual can be a strong one. What I would suggest about that is actually incorporating a process where they can cope with a situation. They learn coping skills earlier in the day. So rather than focusing these coping skills around the bedtime ritual where it can get frustrating and they're very upset and it can end up in a power struggle, as she said, rather actually developing those coping skills at other points. So maybe it's a coping skill when they want to have more fruit for breakfast when actually they've already had a lot. So maybe it would be nice to have a different kind of nutrition in there as well. So maybe it's developing the coping signals around that. So you can just allow them to be with the fact that something is there. The options are you're now going to have a yogurt or you're going to have an egg, but you're not having another bowl full of fruit. And so it might be that you've got some options, you've got some choices. But the thing is that if you are going to scream for the fruit, then that still doesn't make fruit arrive. So, and I think in being with that, they can learn their coping skills, be around for them. Don't leave them to scream. Rather, just be there, present in the background somewhere, asking, are you okay now? Would you like a yogurt now? Are you still hungry? Because it might also be fruit. There's a lot of sugar in fruit, so it might also just be that they wanted more because it tastes good.
Right. And that idea of behavior charts, like kids respond really well to positive reinforcement. And I know a default a lot of the time is people tend to focus on the negative aspect of the behavior, like telling the child, don't do this, don't do that, instead of telling them what you want them to do. So instead of saying, don't hit your brother, tell them what you want them to do. So say, can you please come over here and help me? The outcome's going to be the same. And then you're not focusing so much on the negative behavior. You're just telling them what you want them to do instead.
Yeah, there's some interesting data coming out now about the fact that children don't really understand the negative so much. They focus on the focal word. So when offered something like in two hands, if they were offered a banana and an apple and told not to pick the banana, they'll probably reach for the banana because they register the word banana, not.
Exactly.
So this is just a real example of how they are learning language still. And so actually when we learn language, it's challenging, right? So actually just recognizing that and being clearer with them and with a more positive outlook, recognizing they might not be picking up those negative words.
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of that idea of like what we focus on becomes bigger and what we don't focus on becomes smaller. So if you don't want to focus on your child potentially, hitting their younger brother or sister, then don't focus on it. Redirect them and tell them what you want them to do instead, right? And again, the behavioral reinforcement charts that you could put up maybe on the fridge. If the kids go to bed early, maybe they get a sticker. Maybe after 5 stickers, they get to do a fun activity with mom and dad, like go to the park or something, right? Like spending something that involves quality time. I wouldn't encourage that. This always involves food or treats.
Yeah, not always rewarding with food.
But it could be an option of, if after you get 5 stickers today, we get to spend the morning doing what you want. We can go to the park and play on the swing. So something that involves quality time with one or the parents. And that can be really motivating to kids. Right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's beautiful to give them that motivation as well, rather than, as you said, always focusing on the negative.
Yes.
And also, if you do want to focus on the negative of something that they've done, for example, if they have bitten their sibling or something like that, it's probably a really good time to focus on it another time, not directly after the event, not when they're in the height of the emotions surrounding the event, not when they're potentially, if they do recognize it's wrong, they might be feeling some shame or guilt from doing that, which are big emotions that they don't necessarily know how to deal with. So rather maybe having a quiet, like one-to-one chat about it and about how they would feel if it were them, the situation were reversed and they were the one getting hurt by the sibling. That might be better to have just another time.
And sometimes it's addressing the root cause. Why did they bite their sibling? Is it because they're not getting enough one-on-one time? Right? Like this is really common with people when they have a second child, and they might have a 2 or 3 year old, and then a new baby comes along. And, you know, there's a lot of focus on the new baby, of course, because newborns require a lot of care. And with that, maybe the oldest child doesn't feel like they're getting attention, and they're biting their younger sibling. They're not being nice to their younger sibling because it's no longer about them. So sometimes it's taking that time to spend one-on-one with the older sibling, or being like, what is this serve to bite the sibling? Is it because they're getting more attention? Because when they react negatively, they get attention from mom and dad as well, right? So it's making sure they're getting that attention anyways, and they're not only getting attention when they're engaging in negative behavior, because all that says is, okay, when I behave badly, mom and dad pay more attention to me, and when I behave well, mom and dad don't pay attention to me. Right?
Absolutely.
So,
and this can also be an issue around sickness as well. So this can also manifest in children where you find that they will, you know, feel ill in order to gain the attention of the parent or gain the extra care. And children won't always be able to articulate these things. You know, it's not that you would turn around to a child necessarily and they would tell you that they bit their sibling because they were feeling jealous. It's a subconscious thing. So just reading into the fact that children are not looking to be difficult or negative. They're not trying to create a bad life for themselves and for others. They are actually genuinely coming from a perspective of self-preservation. They're trying to look after themselves, bond with others, and be who they truly are and enjoy the world around them. And so if there's something going wrong with that, that's usually because they've taken on something from the outside world and they're having a challenge with something, whether it's with feelings, whether it's with changes in their environment, or whether it's with a specific interaction or specific element of their life.
Yeah, and that remembering that, you know, every behavior has a feeling attached to it. So if the child is behaving in a way that you don't approve, it's scaling back to what is the underlying feeling, because they don't express their words, they express how they feel through behavior. So it's really looking at, if the child is misbehaving all the time, what are they feeling and why are they feeling like that? And as a parent, what can I do to help them manage that feeling, or maybe not feel it as much, right? If they're feeling jealous because their younger sibling is getting all the attention, then it is, oh, well, maybe we need one-on-one time more with him, right? Or
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also about just bearing in mind when you are disciplining a child, or when you are bringing in a form of parental control or parental direction into a child's life, what is it that you're trying to achieve with what you're doing? Are you trying to you know, express your power, dominate the child? Are you trying to have this kind of direction over the child, or are you trying to cultivate a relationship with the child? Because remembering that children are going to go off into the world in their own. They're going to have their own life, and it's going to start small with going to school, but it's going to gradually go into them going off to be their very own person, having their very own families potentially in life. And so are you actually just making them obey you, or are you cultivating a relationship where they can understand maybe why you're saying in future, maybe not now, but in future, like listen and understand why you're saying that some things should be done a certain way.
Yeah, and thinking about the impact that that will have on the future relationship, right? Is like, am I forcing my child into a place of compliance? Am I trying to control my child through fear? Or am I coming from a perspective of trying to cultivate a long, healthy, lasting relationship with my child, so when they grow up, they're still going to want to be around me?
Absolutely. And who is speaking? Is it me speaking to my child this way? Or is this past generations who spoke to me and I am now echoing their voice through, because it's very common for us to repeat the parenting we received with our children.
Right.
But we might want to make active choices so that the things that we didn't enjoy interacting with as a child are not repeated.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes it's that, remembering just because I was raised with these belief systems, just because I was raised with mom and dad doing that it doesn't need to be passed on to your child, because maybe there's more effective ways to deal with that. Right. And this is kind of like the generational trauma, how sometimes it gets passed on from generation to generation, because it's just a cycle of adults blindly repeating what they learned and what they were taught, even though it might not be the best approach.
But this can be a very challenging topic to deal with inside yourself as well, because what it raises up is the recognition that your parents were not perfect, or your caregivers were not perfect.
Yes.
And while that might be obvious in some ways, in other ways it can feel very undercutting of your own life to realize that your parents were human and made issues too. Once you kind of make your peace with it though, and that can happen really quickly, but once you make your peace with it, it can feel really refreshing. Really beautiful actually to have that new interaction with them, and that new dynamic of you're all just human beings.
Right. Yeah. And I think that kind of idea of like validation, right, with when children grow up and they become their own adults, and sometimes they might address things that happened to them when they were children, and it's remembering as a parent to not be dismissive of that, and to not get defensive. And it doesn't mean that you were a bad parent. This is a valid concern. This is an experience from someone else's perspective. And just as we need to hear other people's perspectives in everyday life, we can also acknowledge and hear our children's perspectives and not take it personally. And, just because you don't agree doesn't mean that that's not how they felt. That doesn't mean that wasn't their experience, right?
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think it can feel very kind of argumentative for parents sometimes when children bring that up and they think they've done their best.
Yes.
But of course, we're all growing, and our best is constantly growing. So in a growth mindset, what was my best yesterday is not my best today, because I've gotten better. So in that way, actually, we're allowed to look back at our past selves without judgment and with honesty and reflection. And just recognizing as well that it's okay to say, I don't think I should have done that. I think I did the wrong thing as an adult.
Yeah.
It's okay to say that. And it's very much in the growth mindset to do that. And people with a growth mindset have been proven to be a lot happier and more successful in life.
Yes.
So if you can cultivate a growth mindset, reward yourself with a pat on the back, because or a beautiful trip to the park or something, because we've learned Kate likes to play on the swings, so it's still good as an adult to have a bit of a play around. But I think it's actually really important to be able to recognize about yourself things that you did in the past and you wouldn't do that way again, because it does mean you've grown and changed as a person.
And again, like, practicing compassion, self-compassion, which is, again, a room of the relationship house, right? If you feel like you are beating yourself up for maybe choices that you made when you were raising your children and now they're adults, it's focusing on cultivating compassion and that acknowledgement that two truths can exist at the same time, and people can have different experiences of the exact same situation, right?
Absolutely.
And in order to continue kind of those healthy relationships with your children as they grow into themselves, that aspect of, acknowledging certain experiences weren't ideal for them as children is okay.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. I think it's, we all live and we all grow and we do our best every day. And at that point, I think that's how we can look back with no regrets, when we really have done our best every day.
Right.
And that doesn't always mean having 100% to give every day. Because if you've only got 20% to give one day and you give it, then you've given 100% of what you had to give.
Right, absolutely.
So it really does, remember to recognize that we are growing up each generation in a slightly different world, or sometimes a spectacularly different world.
Yes.
So just acknowledging that and being with it. And focusing on the fact, I guess, that in all of this, usually what's happening is that we want children to be safe.
Yes.
And I think giving ourselves a little bit of space as well, because it's very difficult to provide absolute safety. I think we've all experienced, I know I've definitely experienced those moments where children seem like that game Lemmings, where they're kind of heading towards the edge of something, and you've just got to try and keep them safe and keep them from kind of issue to issue. They kind of bounce, and you're catching them at each turn. So it is quite a full-time job, and so there is a lot going on with it, but also just making that space in order to try and get some joy from both sides. So just enjoying that time and remembering that they are expressing their feelings through their actions. It's in remembering that I think we can understand them a lot better, because then you start to see whatever action they're giving as they're feeling expressed. So if maybe they don't want to go to bed, maybe working out why. Maybe they're scared of the dark, or maybe they don't want to be alone upstairs while everyone else is downstairs. And we can understand that. We can make changes bearing that in mind. Yeah, so this can help to move forwards more smoothly, and create a better environment for parents and children, well, caregivers and children.
Yeah, and I think that idea, like the best way of really, cultivating healthy adults is also allowing children that space and to be in their own world as well, right? Like it's so easy when we're engaging with children to maybe even subconsciously bring them into our worlds, right? When we're, playing with a niece, nephew, maybe our own children. If you're a caregiver who works in a daycare, it's so easy to every day take children out of their world and bring them into ours instead of going into the children's world.
It can be a lot more fun to go into their world.
Which can be fun, yeah. Like I know, like I did a certification years ago in play therapy, and it was very much focused on how can I go into the child's world instead of bring the child into my world. And I didn't realize how much I was doing it as well in my work with children or with my cousins, how much I would always bring them into my world, like literally telling them how they feel, like, oh, isn't this so cool? Don't you like that? Like, wow, instead of like letting the child lead you and guide, right? So like if the child wants to play house, kind of letting them lead and tell the story and you just go along with it. And sometimes all that involves is just like repeating what they say.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Like it's really simple, and it's funny to see how much they'll go along and tell the story. Like they'll be like, playing with a toy. Oh, this is my friend Bob. And it's like, a difference between bringing them into your world and their world would be like when they tell you this is my friend Bob, it's like, oh, that's your friend Bob. And then the kid will be like, yeah, and he ... Oh, really? He ... And like they'll tell their own story instead of the child being like, this is my friend Bob. And then you're like, oh, really? And what does Bob do? Automatically, you're bringing the child into your world because you're now controlling the conversation instead of letting them write the story and just getting immersed in their world. And it can actually be really fun. And you can see how more engaged kids are actually when you go into their world than when you try to bring them into yours.
And it can be so much fun as well, just to get in there and just kind of play like a child again. It can be really good for us as well to really just do that and get involved in their world rather than bringing them into our one full of all our issues into theirs.
Right, it's like they don't exist.
All their possibility and potential for a while.
Yeah,
we're not saying you can't. Not saying to live in it forever necessarily, but spending some time there is a beautiful thing to do.
Yeah. So an exercise that I always like to encourage caregivers and parents to do is when your child is behaving in a way, or even to think back to a time when your child was behaving in a way that you didn't want them to, and ask yourself, what is the underlying feeling? What is that child trying to show me through the behavior they're displaying right now?
Yeah, just really get them to be with it and think about, what's behind this.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. I think also just recognizing that children can follow through to the natural consequences of their choices.
Yeah.
So, for example, there could be some growth involved in if your child says that they don't want to do their homework, and they're going to school the next day and it's due the next day. Obviously not necessarily doing this over and over, but just for a one-off, there could be some value in letting the child have their way and have to live out the consequences of then not having their homework to hand in the next day.
Yeah.
It can really help them to grow into ownership of their own choices. Of course, it really matters that this is a safe thing that they can try out.
Yes. Yeah.
Noticing whether the hob is hot by touching it is probably not a good one to let them try out for themselves.
Yeah.
So where we allow these natural consequences to follow through, we're going to have to make, as adults, we're going to have to make the reasonable safety choices about those.
Yes. Yeah. And it's making the goal to allow natural consequences to unfold as often as they can, as long as it's not a safety issue, right? And this is a great way to avoid power struggles. You know, so if you're going from maybe the house to the car, or you're walking one block to the shop and your child doesn't want to put their hat on, right? There can usually be a power struggle that ensues with the parent wanting to put the child's hat on. Whereas maybe if you just let them go outside without their hat on, they may say, hey, mommy, daddy, my ears are cold. And then that's when you can explain to them, this is why we wear hats, right? So sometimes it's allowing them to understand the decision making, understanding and recognizing that maybe they don't know why they need to put their hat on, right? They just don't want to wear their hat. They don't know that they don't make the connection that they have to put their hat on because their head's going to get cold or because their ears are going to get cold. Whereas if you allow that to naturally unfold, they're going to make that connection for themselves, and they're going to realize, oh, this is why I put a hat on, because my head and my ears get cold.
And again, it's whether it's safe to do that. So not doing that if it's minus 40 out,
right?
But maybe if it's kind of, 0 or nearly 0, then you can kind of think to yourself, well, they can actually get some understanding and learning from this without having any long-term issue or negative impact to their health.
Yes, yeah.
So, and bring the hat with you, of course.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So that you can be there and to supply it when they do need it, when they decide they need it. Thank you so much for joining us on this session of Soul Therapy.
And we look forward to seeing you in the next session.
Thanks for joining us. We'd love to connect with you live in our group sessions.
Join our online membership to spend weekly group sessions with us, where we will be talking about topics such as depression, anxiety, burnout, relationships, family problems, and addictions, as we work with you to develop your health and well-being.
In addition, this includes access to a private Telegram group, weekly actionable exercises with guaranteed general feedback from us. The 12-week membership comes with an exclusive offer of reduced price one-to-one sessions with us for the duration of the 12-week membership.
A lot can change in 12 weeks. Come and join us and jump into the life you choose.
Remember that to get the most out of these soul therapy sessions, whether the free podcast series or the membership, we advise full participation in all the suggested exercises.
Throw yourself into this fully and become the you that you have always dreamed of being.